what I mean by this is the calories you consume and the calories you expend in a day, they are related, right? Or they have a relationship with your body composition and your body weight, right? And the reason we bring this up as a starting point, because this actually dictates so much, both with regards to the actual like body composition stuff that we're looking for or chasing, and that's the place where most people start. They're like, oh, calories in, calories out, we have this equation that's going to dictate how much I weigh, how much body fat I have. And that's true, but it does also do a lot of stuff in regards to performance. Like Gary said, like you're not going to be at your best performance. Like no one is at their best mood, performance, whatever, if you're kind of cranky from not having eaten, right? If you're kind of like underfed, you're not going to be at your best, right? So it clearly impacts on that. And obviously it impacts on your health, because if we are moving towards higher BMIs, higher obesity levels, higher body fat levels, that is potentially detracting from our health. But more than that, we do also have a relationship there with stuff like fatty liver, right? Or non-alcoholic fatty liver and other things. And they're also dictated by the calories that we're consuming relative to the calories that we are expending, right? So we have to get this right. But what does that actually mean? So Gary, what calories in, calories out, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so fundamentally what we're talking about here is the difference between what you're taking in and what is going out. And the difficult thing about that, as we've discussed many times in the podcast, is that there's only so much we can measure. And much of this is, for the vast majority of the population, under subconscious control, in that when you're deciding, where you end up on that equation on any given day, most people are going to end up with some sort of surplus or deficit as a result of hunger cues or appetite signals, as a result of food that was available to them, as a result of the social situation in which they found themselves that day, where they were working, what shops were on site, whether or not they had prepared food, etc., etc. So there's many different variables that go into determining, what's actually occurring that determines the calories in. And then also, how does that relate to calories out? Are you working an active job? Are you consciously exercising, etc., etc.? So we know that for most people, there are many different variables that go into determining where you come out of that equation. And when people get into fitness, what they try to do is start to get some control over those things. So on the calories inside of things, what they'll start to do is to maybe track their calories or macronutrients, or what they might do first and foremost is try to choose lower calorie options if they're trying to lose weight, or higher calorie options if they're trying to gain weight. They might try to have a specific meal structure that they follow so that they're controlling that calories in. And then what they might start to do is, control their calories out in some way, by trying to take more steps each day, by adopting a formal exercise routine, etc. So these types of things are attempts at getting control over the difference between your calories in and your calories out. The astute practitioner or trainee will realize that there's many different things that you cannot control, such as, how much heat your body is producing or energy that it's wasting, how much you're fidgeting throughout the day. You can consciously make yourself tap your foot, but a lot of the time that's happening subconsciously. How often you're blinking, how much you're sweating, etc., etc. Many different variables under the hood are not directly measurable for the user at home who's trying to improve their health and fitness. That also occurs on the calories inside of the spectrum, where you can't exactly tell what the margin of error on the food label that you're reading is, how efficient your digestive tract is going to be at extracting all nutrients versus someone else, and then how the complexities of the overall diet might affect that. For example, if you're eating a food that gives you diarrhea versus a food that gets stuck in your gut for longer, that might impact the amount of nutrients that have been extracted during that gut transit time. So there's many different things there that we can't necessarily measure. So we try to control what we can control. And then that's when we end up having some sort of idea of where our calorie balance or imbalance is at. And for health, for the vast majority of the people, by definition, given that overweight and obesity is a larger problem than underweight, would be trying to maintain a calorie deficit. In Ireland, I think 35% or so are in the obese category, and then roughly 65 to 67% are overweight. So you've got 2/3 of the population that would likely benefit from losing some degree of body fat Obviously, you don't necessarily, as we've discussed many times before, just rely on BMI when making these decisions. But you can probably appreciate that most people are going to be trying to reduce their calories rather than increase them. Of course, we do encounter many people at Triage who are trying to increase their calories, particularly those who are trying to gain muscle, or potentially those who are, coming out of eating disorder recovery or something like that. But most people are going to be trying to make some changes in the direction of reducing their calorie intake, increasing their calorie output or energy expenditure or daily activity levels, with the intent of ending up at a deficit at the end of the day, week, month, or designated diet period.
And this is one of those things that if you get this, if you understand calories, you understand this calorie balance, this equation of, your calories in the stuff that you're eating versus the calories that you're expending. If you understand this, it actually explains so much, right? And this is where a lot of people fall down, especially if you're kind of new to this stuff. You'll get, caught up and sold in these lies of like, oh, food timing is the thing that matters. Oh, certain foods are the things that matter, right? Ultimately, all diet strategies, right? If you're trying to lose weight, gain weight, maintain weight, improve health, improve performance, whatever it is, they all come back fundamentally to calories, right? They are in some way, say you're going on a fat loss diet, your friend down the road, they're like, oh, I'm on this diet, it's helping me lose weight, right? The diet that they are doing is just putting them in, or rather the way that they are eating is just putting them in a calorie deficit. It's leading them to consume less calories than they previously consumed. And as a result, they're losing weight, right? But when we're looking at this stuff, we don't want to just think about the transient, like, oh, well, I'll go on this diet or I'll cut out this food group or whatever. We want to be thinking like, how are we going to set up our diet long-term so that we can find a way to eat at a level of calories that is right for our body, right? Because what happens is, weight gain creeps up on you. You basically find yourself at maintenance, right? You find this equilibrium between the calories that you're consuming and the expenditure that you have. Most people find themselves at some sort of equilibrium around that maintenance, right? That might not lead you to the best body composition that you desire, or the best performance or whatever, but most people find themselves at maintenance. Or what often happens in the Western world, at least, is you find yourself at an ever so slight surplus. Right. And that's either through, consuming more calories, or it's either through consuming more calories or through, moving less over time. This often happens. You'll see, especially, people that transition away from being in university and college or whatever, they go into the working world and they go from, having to, cycle to college and, commute in between different, classroom settings, whatever. And they're up at, 15,000 steps per day. And they go from that environment, they get a car when they're, 20 or something, and then they go into the working world, and then all of a sudden they're sitting at a desk for 8 hours per day, right? And they probably end up eating, relatively similar to what they were eating before, because they had built up those habits. And now all of a sudden we're in a situation where your calories out, the expenditure side of things, is now much lower than where it used to be. And as a result, even though you're doing the same stuff in terms of what you think you're doing, the conscious stuff where you're like, I'm still eating the exact same, how come I'm gaining weight? The rationale behind that is because now you are in a calorie surplus, because we've got this mismatch between calories in and calories out, right? Now, ultimately, again, we could spend all day talking about this, but I think that gets the point across. There is this equation, there is this kind of ratio, this relationship between these two numbers, and depending on which way we manipulate one or the other, whether you eat more or eat less, or you move more or move less, that then influences where we are at with our overall calorie expenditure and our overall calorie intake. And as a result, how our body composition moves, how our health changes, how our performance changes, etc. Right?